communicate to each other, and we're going to stand our ground where we have boundaries, and we're going to continue to compromise.
Well, that's
where
what
we want.
love should do.
Yeah.
That's what love should do. Like if you love someone, if it's genuine love, you see their hidden soul. That's a good way of thinking about it. You get a glimpse of the light that they could reveal to the world if they revealed it. That's what you see. And then to act in love is to encourage that to come forward and to discourage anything that gets in its way.
That's why I love the Michelangelo effect I'd heard of, and I'd been using it.
Okay, so why the Michelangelo effect?
This is why. Michelangelo sees this huge, massive, unhewn block of marble.
I see.
And inside of that, he is able to see David. And over time, slowly, he will chip away, and he will chip away, and he will chip away. So you see something that isn't there, that's inside of the thing, which is rough and unhewn and uncivilized and undomesticated and rambunctious and sometimes terrible. And you were able to, from that,
that's actually part of the Tao Te Ching, the uncarved block. So a child is an uncarved block in the Taoist view, and you remove everything that's excess until what's perfect remains, right? And that's, see, the logos in the Old and New Testament, the logos that creates the world, is the judging faculty that, what would you say, that separates the wheat from the chaff, right? And it's compassion in a sense, because if you're compassionate towards someone, you want what's best for them, all things considered. But that compassion, in the highest sense, can't exist without judgment, because the judgment is, this part of you isn't worthy to continue. And certainly that's what you're doing with your children. When you see them misbehaving, you think, not that. Something more sophisticated. Even with my little granddaughter the other day, she's very, very playful, and she's a very nice little girl. She's very playful and very fun and funny and not neurotic. And so she's a pleasure to be around. But she hasn't seen me for a while, and so she was poking me, getting me to chase her around and poking me, and she'd come up and give me a whack, And at one point she whacked me too hard. And she knew it. And I said, that's not fun. That's not acceptable. And then she stopped. But she was playing with that edge, trying to find out where fun is and, how hard can I hit Grandpa? She doesn't bloody well know. She kind of knows, but she needs to know exactly. Well, I can't let her get away with it, because then she's not fun to play with. She has to learn to come and give her grandpa a whack in exactly the way that elicits a playful response and that isn't annoying. And so there's a very... you might think, well, it's pretty harsh judgment to lay on a 5-year-old. It's like, no, it's not. I would like her to be the most fun kid to play with that she could be, right? And so I'm not going to pretend that it's okay when it's not.
Not setting that boundary is almost like a curse.
It is a curse.
Yeah, there you go away.
Because then how's she going to play with other kids if she doesn't know
they're not going to be
rules?
as forgiving as Grandpa.
Definitely not.
Yeah, we were talking before we got started. I had this conversation with Robert Sapolsky, and it was really, really profound. I mean, I know that he's a brilliant guy, and this new book of his is about sort of free will and determinism, which has got an upper bound on how interesting that is for me. But he gave this quote to Andrew Huberman where he said, dopamine is not about the pursuit of happiness. It is about the happiness of pursuit.
Right. That's definitely right.
And I haven't been able to stop seeing this everywhere. So Morgan Housel, a friend, told me this great story. He is an investor. He's got a fund. He's an author. He's got a family. He's got all of these things. Yeah. They plan to go away on holiday. And they've been planning it for a long time. And with the kids and the wife and him and all of his businesses, it was an arduous thing to go through to get themselves out there. And finally, they get there after the journey and the plane and the children and the crying and all of the rest of it. And he walks out on the balcony on the first night of this holiday that they've planned for forever. And his first thought to himself was, wouldn't it be great if we came back here next year? It would be so great if we could come back here next year. So literally during the supposed enjoyment of the destination, he was already thinking about the journey. And, it's not the journey, it's not the destination, it's the journey is kind of trite, but it puts a new perspective on it. Well, there is no destination. Each destination is simply the beginning of the next journey. And I haven't not been able to see it. I see it everywhere. I see it everywhere in my own life.
Well, there's technically two different forms of reward. There's consummatory reward. And so that's the reward. That's what an orgasm is. It's consummatory reward. It brings the behavioral and perceptual sequence to a halt. It ends it, right? At the climax, it ends it. But then it's over. That journey is over, right? Then there's the dopaminergic reward that Sapolsky was talking about. And dopaminergic reward is evidence of advancement towards a goal. Right. Okay, so there's a corollary to that. Well, how do you become optimally engaged? Because dopamine facilitates engagement and focus, which is why drugs like amphetamines can be used for kids who are attention deficit disordered. You tap up the dopamine response, they lock on, right? Okay, so they're locking on to a goal-directed pursuit. The problem with amphetamines is that they can lock you on so hard you can't get out of the frame. So like kids on amphetamines will obsess, for example, about cleaning up their closet. They can't switch to the next activity. Okay, dopaminergic reward is reward that's accrued in relationship to a goal. Okay, so what's an implication of that? Well, pursue the highest possible goal. Well, why? Because the kick from advancement is higher. Now, you have to balance that. It can't be, you have to advance, right? Because imagine the reward's got two components. Number one is you're moving towards something valuable. Okay, so you want it to be as valuable as possible. Okay, but you have to be moving. So it can't be so valuable that it's out of your reach.
You're going to walk to the moon. I'm not going to be able to see every single increment that I make.
Yes. You want to get to the moon. That's right. You can't walk there. So it's a bad plan. You need something extremely valuable that you can move towards. Okay, so part of the reason that you establish a relationship with God, let's say, is because that's what sets the upper bound to your vision. It's like, I want things to be the best they could be. That's a vision of paradise. Well, that has to be fractionated into, your proximal decisions, but lurking behind that should be this continual movement towards, what would you say, a heaven that recedes as you approach it. That's the proper vision of heaven. A heaven is a place that's perfect and getting better, both at the same time. That's what music shows you, because a great piece of music is perfect, but it's just getting better as it unfolds. And you need that. This is part of the problem with a static utopian vision, something Dostoevsky criticized. If you gave people nothing but consummatory reward, he famously says, so that they can do nothing but sit in tubs of hot water, eat cake, and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, human beings would break that all to hell in a moment just so they have something interesting to do.
What was that quote that you said on Rogan years ago? If we were to make the world sufficiently perfect, the only desired lack would be for the desire of lack itself. What's that?
That's Kierkegaard.
That? What's the proper? Can you remember the proper?
Well, Kierkegaard pointed out that if as we make the world easier and easier, so this is perhaps part of the problem with the material plenty that's at hand, is that at some point what becomes lacking is lack itself.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Exactly. It's optimal deprivation. And if everything is delivered to you on a platter, it's like, what the hell are you even doing there? This happens in the story of Abraham. So Abraham, who's the father of nations, right? So Abraham gets it right. He has everything at the beginning of the story. He has rich parents. He's got nothing that he has to do. He's like 70 when the story opens. He's been taken care of hand and foot his whole life. And the voice of God comes to him and says, I'm the God of your ancestors, telling you, get out of your zone of comfort. Get out into the world. And Abraham's pretty old by this point. But for whatever reason, he decides that he's going to forego the comfort for the adventure. And then as Abraham progresses, he makes the requisite sacrifices, each becoming more difficult as he ascends. And he adopts this pattern of relationship with the God that calls him to adventure that literally makes him the father of nations. And so you can even think about that biologically if you want. You might as well. People like Dawkins think reproduction is sex. And that's why he can talk, for example, about the selfish gene making itself manifest in sex. Reproduction isn't sex. Sex is a necessary but insufficient precondition for reproduction. Abraham adopts a mode of being a sacrificial mode of being that establishes the optimal environment for his sons, who then establish the optimal environment for their sons and their sons and their sons. So you can imagine that what Abraham is doing, this is what the story means, is he's adopting a mode of behavior that works best, all things considered, across multiple generations. And he sacrifices everything to that. It's this incredibly expansive vision.
Given that we're in a world which is comfortable, and we have created buildings in which there are heavy things that you pick up and put down in the same place because it's simply so rare that you have to pick up heavy things, right?
Right.
The
We have
proliferation,
speed bumps on our roads for the same reason.
proliferation of ice baths and sauna and even reading to some extent, reading difficult things. Where should people go, given that they are in a world which is more comfortable than ever before? Where should they go to encourage them to find difficult things?
Truth. Truth is what's optimally difficult. The truth is optimally difficult. It's a really wonderful thing to know. The truth is adventure. There's no distinction. Partly because if you're going to just say what you believe to be true, you have to let go of the consequences. You can't predict the consequences. Well, there's no difference between not being able to predict the consequences and having an adventure. They're the same thing, right?
Because if you knew the consequences, it wouldn't be an adventure.
It's not an adventure if the consequences are foregone.
The same as it's no sacrifice or courage if there's no risk.
Right. It's exactly the same. And so it's a wonderful thing to know that optimized adventure is to be had in the truth. Think in every given situation. So Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount that to orient yourself properly, and it's often viewed as this hippie paean. Take no thought of the morrow will take care of itself. God takes care of the sparrows, he'll certainly take care of you. It's like a hippie wet dream. That isn't the core of the message. The core of the message is very straightforward. Christ says, aim up to the highest thing you can possibly imagine. So that's the relationship with God. You put what's at the pinnacle, properly at the pinnacle, and you aim at that. And then you concentrate that, and it's that, and treating other people like you would like to be treated yourself. That sets the moral frame. Then you attend to the day and the cares of the day. It's like once you've established the proper moral frame, you pay attention to the day and you live in truth. And that moves you towards that destination. You have to have the orientation right. You have to be aiming up. But then it's just a matter of, what would you say, abiding by the truth. That's the logos that sets people free. And that's right.
Doing it properly, right? There was one of the other rules that didn't make it into your book. Nothing well done is insignificant.
Right. Yeah, well, you accrue. So Christ tells his followers in the Gospels to store up treasure in heaven, not in the places that moths can eat and rust can destroy. Well, what is that? What is meant by that? Well, it's meant by it means the same thing that you just pointed to, which is that if you run yourself through a disciplinary process, so you accomplish something, maybe you don't attain the goal you were aiming at, but you accrue a new way of looking at the world and a set of skills. Well, if you just keep doing that, you have multiple ways of looking at the world and more skill. Well, that's your storehouse of treasure. The reason women use wealth as a proxy for attractiveness is because wealth is a proxy for competence. It's not competence because you can be rich and useless. Now, it's not that easy, but it can at least happen temporarily. But women use markers of wealth to assess competence. And the competence is the treasure, not the wealth. Because if you're competent, you could be thrown into the desert and you'll make it bloom.
I've said this about people that go to the gym. So from the outside, someone that goes to the gym and has got a good body or whatever, there's the body, and this is what you get to touch during sex and when you're intimate, right? But the story that someone who has a good body tells you about the sort of person that they are is much more important, I think, than the way that it manifests physically. It's someone who is reliable, who is able to overcome hard things, who is self-disciplined.
Disciplined.
Yeah,
it's a marker
it's
for
just
discipline.
this whole big, long laundry list of things. They're able to deal with pain and discomfort, which is kind of sexy in a way.
Well, and it's the perfect materialist disciplinary strategy, right? Because it's very concrete. Well, you change your body. It's like, is that a spiritual pursuit? Well, it is insofar as it requires, long-term discipline and sacrifice. And you might hope, and I think this is likely the case, that, you can get stuck in the bodily self-improvement niche and focus on that too obsessively, but you can also use it as a stepping stone to discipline pursuit itself. And lots of people do that.
I think I told you the last time that we chatted about the manopause, this thing that I'd come up with. So I noticed toward the end of my 20s that lots of guys who had been training with a particular modality, usually bodybuilding, usually exclusively for the way that they looked, realized as they approached their 30s that they were getting out of breath going up a set of stairs and that they maybe couldn't touch their toes, and they looked fantastic, but no, they just felt like they should maybe start to value different things, and they then changed their training and they would go and do Brazilian jiu-jitsu or yoga or CrossFit or some other form of whatever, and that precipitated a change in everything else. And I saw this in myself, right? I get toward the end of my 20s. I've achieved success in many of the ways that society tells a young man that he should value success. There was a discordance. Something felt off. And you then think, okay, well, maybe I need to assess whether or not the things that I've been told I should want are things that I actually want to want. And very quickly you realize, I don't know, it feels like a quarter-life crisis. I think so many men go through this. They go, I either succeeded or didn't succeed at a game that I was told that I was supposed to value playing, and upon reflection, I really don't care for it as much as I thought I did. Maybe there was some elements, I was so proud of what I'd done with my business partners, I was so proud of the things that we'd achieved, but then there was other stuff where I was like, why have I attached so much of my sense of self-worth into this and this and this? And then you have to assess. And
So this is what happens in the story of Exodus when Moses encounters the burning bush. So he's just going about his business as a shepherd, and he's doing all right. He's got 2 wives. He likes his father-in-law. He's well regarded in this new country that he's in. He's left Egypt, where there's a price on his head, essentially, for killing an Egyptian who was tormenting one of the Hebrews. Anyways, Moses is just going about his business as a shepherd, which was a very tough job in those days. And this thing catches his eye, this glimmer, this gleam, and he goes to investigate. Okay, so what does that mean? It means as you're progressing through life, something will capture your interest. And in the story you just told, it's like somebody decides they're going to start going to the gym. There's something about becoming physically fit that calls to them, right? Which is an interesting thing, right? Because it calls to them. It's not even necessarily a decision they make. It's more like a possibility that makes itself manifest that's of interest. So they decide to pursue it. So they look into it more deeply. Well, so Moses approaches the burning bush, and he gets closer and closer, right? And a bush is a symbol of life, right? Like it's a tree of life. And a tree of life that's on fire is being, that's the life, the tree, and becoming, that's the fire, the transformation. So a burning bush is a symbol of being and becoming as such. Now, it's something that beckons. Okay, so now you pursue your physical fitness because it's called to you. And you concentrate more and more on it, you get more and more disciplined. But as you get more and more disciplined, you start to transform, right? And so your vision starts to change. Now, what happens to Moses is that as he gets closer and closer to the burning bush, he starts to realize that he's on sacred ground. So he's going deeper. The investigation is taking him deeper. So he takes off his shoes and continues to approach. He's still going down the same trail, right, pursuing this thing. And then the voice of God itself speaks to him from the midst of the burning bush. And that's what turns him into a leader. And so what does the story mean? It means that as you walk through life in your normal mode, things will call to you. And if you pursue them, they will take you deep. It doesn't really matter what it is that calls. What matters is that you pursue it, and you pursue it to the depths. And as you pursue it to the depths, you will become transformed. And if you do that without reservation, that will turn you into the person who frees the slaves and opposes the tyrants. And that is how it works. That's the call. And that can happen in any direction, virtually any direction. You just have to pursue it with sufficient faith, right?
One of the things that's been, I guess, derogated a lot by pretty much everybody at the moment is university education. And I had such an interesting time at university, almost exclusively outside of my education. Right? All of the good things that happened to me while I spent 5 years at Newcastle didn't include what I was taught. It was never inside of the lecture theatre. It was everything I was doing outside of that. And lots of my friends, it's very trendy on the internet to mock higher education as useless pieces of paper. It's not, you don't need it in order to be able to be successful. It's certainly the thing that I've ended up doing. This podcast didn't require me to go to university. Maybe in some ways it did, but also definitely from a qualification perspective, it didn't. But I think I'm still relatively pro university experience. And yeah, you've got Peterson Academy launching, which is your new thing. I wondered how you thought, well, basically, are universities salvageable given that so much that's good about the university experience has almost nothing to do with the education side of it?
Are they salvageable? Some are, I imagine. Hillsdale does great.
What's that?
It's a conservative college in northeastern U.S. run by Larry Arnn. They have a 1% dropout rate as opposed to the typical 50% dropout rate. And they provide a classical, what used to be a liberal education, liberal arts education. It's a more conservative enterprise given how the Overton window has shifted. But Larry's students concentrate on physical fitness. His philosophy department tends to meet in the weight room, which is pretty interesting. He has weight benches scattered all around the campus. About a third of the students take music courses, so the place is very musical. It's a very disciplined place. The quality of education is extremely high. So there are institutes that are holding to their mandate. I think that's rare. And I think overall, the universities have become irretrievably corrupt, as far as I can tell. And so we had hoped that we could provide something approximating an alternative, but you put your finger on one of the complexities in doing that. It's easy to think that a university is the transmission of knowledge from experts to empty vessels, the students, let's say. So it's lectures, tests, and accreditation. But that's not really what a university is. It's an apprenticeship. If you're fortunate when you go to university, you find a professor or two that you can work with who really teach you how to think. Those professors are generally quite rare, and you're fortunate if you do establish a relationship like that, especially at a big university where the student to faculty ratio is absurdly high, like 200 to 1.
I was in lecture theatres that were 300 to 1. Yeah,
right.
I didn't get a relationship like that with any of my...
Right. And that's really not good, because you need an apprenticeship relationship to become educated fundamentally. We started this, we're formulating Peterson Academy. We're hoping that we can provide people with extremely high quality lectures. I'm fortunate, as you are, to be able to reach out to people who are charismatic and well educated, and we offer them a good financial deal, and we treat them very well, and they come down to Miami and they record a relatively short lecture series, 8 hours, and we're implementing state-of-the-art testing procedures, and we're going to be giving out a certificate that you will have to earn to acquire. And so we're hoping that the quality of our graduates will be such that the certificate will speak for itself as a marker for conscientiousness and educated expertise. We'll see. We're also building out the social side of it because, as you pointed out, a huge part of what happens to you when you go to university is social and socialization. You get to make a whole new group of friends. It's a big deal, right? It's one of those times in your life where you can parcel off who you were and you can become something new.
Well, you remember every single summer, at least for me, maybe this was because I was chronically so unpopular in school. I would come back every summer imagining that I would be able to reinvent myself. I'm going to be the cool kid this year. I'm going to be the sporty kid this year or whatever.
Right.
But the big one is age 18 because you're not even in the same town. No one even knows who you are. No one even knows what to think about who you are.
Right.
And that for me was the big inflection point of me going from the child that I was to the sort of young adult that I was going to end up.
Right. Well, if you're fortunate, you have a number of times where that happens in your life, where you can make a relatively clean break and you can invent yourself anew. Right?
This is just to interject there. There's an idea called monk mode, which has kind of become a bit of a meme online. But I first read about this years ago, and it involves an extended period of isolation to work on yourself, to reflect on your flaws, to kind of do the inner work, to introspect. It's usually tied in with meditation, with improving your diet, with improving your physical fitness, your mental fitness, all of these different things. And that... I've almost seen it as if doing that and focusing on yourself for a short space of time that's very, very, it's maybe a couple of months really, really focusing on you, still going about and doing your work and doing the rest of the things, but outside of that, just really, really trying to make yourself as good as possible. Periodizing that, for me, was one of the most powerful inflections aside from the lifestyle change. And
that's what confession is supposed to be, fundamentally. I mean, when you take stock of yourself, you confess. You confess to yourself and you make your sins a reality. You assess yourself for your insufficiency and you proclaim your insufficiencies. And then you can start working on them. It's like, it's painful. Here's all the things that I'm not. Here's all the things that I'm not that I would like to be, right? That's painful self-examination. But the advantage is you get all your problems on the table. And the advantage to that is that problem by problem, there's likely some hope. Like, for example, you said you were unpopular when you were a teenager, but that doesn't mean that you had to carry that forward into university, right? There was a possibility that... So how did you get out of that? What did you do?
The main reason, I think, was that I didn't really understand how to relate to other kids. So I found myself obsessing over the way that other kids would wear their shirts or tie their ties or the sort of shoes that they would wear. Or
right, so you were looking at external models or markers of
that's
belonging.
That's why they had friends and I didn't.
Right.
And I didn't realize that it was just, I wasn't socially adept. I didn't understand how to relate to other kids very well. And I think I just got to the stage, especially when I went to university, that I'd spent enough time for me to have learned at least some rough-hewn social skills, and now finally was able to sort of cast off some of the presuppositions that had maybe been following me. Because
what were the opening points for you? Like, do you remember the first friendship you made in university?
Oh yeah, the guys that I lived with. So
okay, so these were roommates?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good see, that's a thing that's hard to duplicate online, right?
Correct.
Because it's having a group of roommates is a formative experience.
It was crazy for me. I didn't know because, again, only child, 2 parents, living in a small house. I didn't know that you were supposed to knock on someone's bedroom door before you were to go in.
Right.
I'd never done that.
Right,
I'd spent 18 years. I'd never had to knock on anybody's bedroom door. It's like, mum and dad are down. Like, who else is there? I'm going to knock on the dogs, like the kitchen door, to see if the dogs mind me going into the kitchen. And so many of those things, like, looking back on it now, are just so ridiculous. Not knowing that was something that you were supposed to do.
Yeah, well, not knowing those elementary skills, though, that can be a huge impediment. You know, I had people in my clinical practice. We spent hours practicing how to introduce them and to shake hands, because you want to be expert at that. Because if you're not good at that at all, like if you're really bad at it, you're screwed. You can't even tell someone your name. And so how are you going to make a friend then? You announce yourself as incompetent with your first move. And then if that happens to you 10 times, you're so terrified.
Disincentivizes.
Oh God, terribly. And so you should become expert at that. That's something you can do with your kids, is so they can become expert at introducing themselves. Shake hands, do it with a bit of a firm grip. Look at the other person. Try smiling, match your tempo to the other person.
Another dynamic that I've been thinking about recently, I was at a retreat in LA a few months ago, and one of the guys that was there had said he'd stopped talking and writing on the internet because he noticed that the story he was telling in public, he began feeling the necessity to live up to in private. And I think that whether you're a writer or just someone that's got 500 followers on your Instagram and a Facebook from back in the day or whatever, there is an online persona that people put forward that they then almost feel is more real than what they are, and then they try and reverse engineer themselves to fit this new. Well,
that's the problem with writing essays that contain what your professor wants to hear. So you can't do that without altering your soul. You can't do that. You cannot construct for yourself a false persona designed to extract resources from the world without that becoming part of you. No one is that sophisticated. No one can have two selves like that. It's part of the reason why you have to be very careful about what you say and do, is that when you practice falsehood, you become false. It's not like those are beliefs that are just in your head. You rewire yourself so you start to literally see the world through the frame of your falsehoods. That's a very bad plan.
I've heard you say, if you say things long enough, you're going to believe them.
You become them. It's even worse than believing them. It's deeper than that. They're built into you as unquestioned implicit axioms.
And as we said earlier on, this can go in either direction, right? You can fake it until you make it, one small step at a time, moving toward a vision which you know is positive, and you continually reassess to ensure that you're not getting hijacked and going in the wrong direction.
Right. Yes.
Or
you can generate so look, in the Pinocchio movie, which I've analyzed to death in the Disney Pinocchio movie.
You're Mr. Pinocchio, yeah.
Yes.
World's leading Pinocchio scholar.
So Pinocchio, exactly. Pinocchio is trying to get rid of the strings that pull on him every which way, that aren't under his control, and to become something genuine. Okay, so he has three basic temptations. One is to lie, right? So that's the nose. Another is to be an actor. And when I first came across that in the movie, I thought, what the hell's going on here? One of Pinocchio's temptations is to be an actor. Now, why would the Hollywood people do that? Why would they denigrate the actor? And then I thought, it's not an actor. It's a false persona. To be the actor instead of the real thing. To be the appearance instead of the reality. To take the credit instead of doing the work, right? To be false. Next temptation is to be neurotic. It's so interesting, especially in the world that we have now, how perspicacious these animators were. Pinocchio is literally enticed onto the island of pleasure by a false doctor who diagnoses him with an illness he doesn't have. And the story is, look how sick you are. You're working too hard. You need to go to Pleasure Island. Well, Pleasure Island is run by slavers. Right. So it's perfect. Well, be careful what you practice. Be careful what you practice, right? You can be the actor of your own ideal, and that's a way of stepping forward. But when you make false claims to who you are, to gain status in consequence, you're perverting your soul. What's the soul? The soul is something like the structure through which the world reveals itself to you. It's something like that. So you don't see much of the world, right? You see it through narrow apertures. You see what you allow in. That's another way of thinking about it. You better make sure it's the bright part of the world revealing itself to you. And that isn't going to be the case if you lie.
One of the problems I think that a lot of the people listening to this podcast, and certainly a lot of my friends who are smart and cerebral, encounter, they think themselves into problems and they struggle to use their intuition because they are able to come up with a reason about why they should or should not at any moment. Talking about the soul or the inner voice or the conscience, or, you might refer to it as God that's coming through, the best version of yourself. People that ruminate and introspect are very capable of talking themselves into or out